Well, thank you so very much, and I'm appreciating this discussion, and I'm very thankful that our witnesses are here today. Professor Galpern, some people have referred to recent sovereign debt restructurings in which countries like Argentina and Ecuador have had the terms of their debt amended by their creditors to be a success. Continuing with this restructuring argument, however, I think touting these restructurings as successful ignores the pain and suffering that any sovereign debt crisis inflicts on a country's citizens, especially the poor. And let me just say what I think I have learned about some of these agreements that these countries get into. They're desperate. Many of them want to increase their infrastructure. Some of them are trying to increase tourism as an effort to show up, the economy in their countries. And so while they are desperate and they sign on to these agreements, they don't really anticipate that they're not going to be able to repay the debt and not cause harm to their citizens. So what do you say about their plight and the restructurings, et cetera, et cetera?
Chairwoman, thank you for your question. And I agree wholeheartedly, and not just that you can't measure restructurings success by their speed. You also have to look at actual human beings' well-being, but also just the durability of them. I mean, Argentina and Ecuador are in distress weeks after they restructure, right? And I think reiterating and amplifying some of what my colleagues said, building better capacity and agency in the borrowing countries that do need tremendous infrastructure investment, I think should be an absolute priority. I know transparency can sound like, meaningless sort of pablum, but if you have standardized terms that everyone is aware of, if you know when terms deviate from the standard, if there's multilateral capacity building, I think that we're going to be way better off. I think if countries have these domestic laws that my colleague mentioned, by the way, the carve-outs include laws in other countries. If anybody passes a law requiring disclosure, I think that is going to embarrass a whole lot of creditors into at least somewhat less abusive terms.
Thank you very much. What can be done to incentivize the borrowing countries to seek some help in, dissecting the agreement to see if it's in their best interest and perhaps get some advice before signing off on these agreements?
So I think there's tremendous demand, and this is completely in my different capacity. So we have this initiative called Sovereign Debt Forum, where we have done training sessions with developing country debt managers, and the attendance is very high, right? I think having standard contracts out there, because everybody who gets a contract put in front of them is told, oh, this is perfectly normal. And just like a homeowner that borrows, from a bank and on abusive terms, everybody thinks they're going to repay. And there's genuine humanitarian need, right? So we can't say, well, just stop borrowing.
That's right.
And we need concessional surge capacity at multilaterals. I mean, maybe Mr. Morris can talk some more about that, but there needs to be affordable funding for basic human needs so that countries aren't driven into abusive terms.
Thank you very much. Let me take a moment here to direct a question to Mr. Morris. In the G20's debt service suspension initiative, which temporarily suspends the debt service payments of poor countries to G20 nations, China did not suspend debt service payments to China Development Bank, asserting that the CDB is a commercial entity, despite the fact that it is under the control of the Communist Party State Council. Some of China's contracts you examined in your report contain false default and acceleration clauses to which a default in one China loan in a country would trigger a default across the board on all China loans in the country. Linking all China investments in a country this way suggests as a matter of contract that China is presenting itself as a unitary entity. Mr. Morris, isn't this inconsistent with the Chinese government's propaganda in debt discussions that not all loans, such as those by China Development Bank, are centrally controlled?
Well, thank you, Chair Waters. I think this is a real challenge, and I think, yes, our I think our research provides additional evidence that if we're looking at China Development Bank, not only is it unambiguously owned by the Chinese government, but it is a policy lever for the Chinese government. And that ought to add to the burden on China to continue, the argument that it is a commercial bank with no policy ties to the government just doesn't hold up. And so I think the U.S. ought to be pressing aggressively on this point. As Anna Gelpern said, in principle, it shouldn't matter if we have an agreement that all creditors have to be on board, but we know in practice that commercial creditors haven't been participating. So that gives, CDB room to sit on the sidelines on these discussions.
Well, I want to thank you. My time has long since expired, and as we go on with the hearing, perhaps we can get more involvement in this aspect of it. Thank you very much. I yield back to the chair, Mr. Himes. Thank you.
The chairwoman's time has expired. The gentleman from Texas, Mr. Williams, is recognized for 5 minutes of questions.